Jesus received the message and did not move. Mary and Martha had sent a runner across the Jordan with 7 words. Lord, the one you love is sick. And the moment those words reached him, the moment the messenger stood there breathing hard and waiting for him to call for his sandals, Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. The man he loved was dying. He knew it, and he did not go. That is what John records in chapter 11, verses 3 through 6. He records it without softening it, without inserting an explanation, without offering the reader a comfortable bridge between the love and the delay. He simply writes it down, and then he does something in the Greek that has been quietly buried under 20 centuries of English translation. The conjunction in John 11:6, the small word that connects Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus to, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. That word is aun. Therefore, not but, not however, not despite. Therefore, he loved them, therefore he waited. The love is the reason for the delay. The delay is what the love produced. Read that sentence again, slowly, until it stops sounding like a translation error and starts sounding like a deliberate theological grenade dropped into the middle of the chapter by a man who watched it happen and never recovered. Because if Oyun is right, and it is right, every Greek manuscript we have agrees, then everything you have been told about why God sometimes does not arrive when you call has been pointed in the wrong direction. He did not delay despite loving Lazarus. He delayed because of it. And by the time he finally walked the road to Bethany, the man he loved was 4 days in the tomb, not 3, 4. And that number, that specific, deliberate, unmistakable number, was a knife pointed at every Jewish heart standing in that crowd. They knew what 4 days meant. We do not. They did. By the end of what we are about to walk through, you will. You will know exactly why John, who could have written many days, or several days, or simply after he died, chose to write 4. You will know what every Jewish mourner in first-century Judea believed about the soul of a dead person, and what changed on the 4th day, and why Martha's small detail in John 11:39, Lord, by this time he stinketh, was not stage direction. It was a theological surrender. There are 3 things hidden inside this story that almost no one watching has ever been told, and I am going to give them to you now, by name, so you know exactly what you came here for. The first is the meaning of those 4 days. Why the number is not incidental, why a 1-day difference would have collapsed the entire miracle, and why Jesus waited not until it was late, but until it was impossible. The second is the most disturbing sentence in John 11, the one in verse 15, where Jesus tells the disciples plainly, I am glad I was not there. Not relieved, not resigned, glad. And the reason he gives has nothing to do with Lazarus. The third is the question that has unsettled honest readers for 2,000 years. Why did Jesus weep at that tomb when he knew with absolute certainty that within minutes Lazarus would be walking out of it? What were those tears for, if not for grief? These are not interpretations. They are facts that have been sitting in the original text since John, in his old age in Ephesus, around 95 A.D., dictated this chapter to a scribe and asked him to read it back. And by the time we finish, every one of them will be yours. If this is the kind of slow, unhurried walk through what the gospel actually says, the kind that does not flatten the difficult parts and does not skip the words the translator softened, subscribe now. It costs you nothing, and it means you will not miss what we do here. Now stay with me, because the scene we are about to enter has been read so often that most people have stopped seeing what is in it. Lazarus, in his house in Bethany, less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, is dying. The smell of olive oil and the cloth being warmed for his fever fills the upper room. His sisters take turns at his bedside. They have already sent for Jesus. They have done the one thing every faithful Jew did when there was no one else left to ask. And on the other side of the Jordan, in the place John identifies as Bethany beyond the Jordan, a runner finds Jesus and delivers the message, and the disciples wait for the answer they assume is coming. He is going to leave immediately. That is what he does. They have watched him do it for 3 years. A centurion servant, a bleeding woman, a child in the synagogue ruler's house. He hears the need. He turns. He walks. That is the rhythm. They know it. And he does not move. The hours pass. The first day ends. The disciples, sitting around a small fire in the cool of the evening, watch him and wait for the explanation that does not come. The second day passes. The dust on the road thickens with no one walking it. And somewhere across the Jordan, in a house in Bethany, Lazarus dies. And maybe that is exactly the place you have been standing. You sent the message. You named the situation in the words that cost you to say them. The diagnosis, the marriage, the child, the prayer that has been in the queue so long you have almost stopped expecting an answer to arrive. You did the one thing faith required. You asked, and the silence on the other end has gone on long enough now that you have started to wonder if the message was even received. Stay there for a moment. Do not rush past it. That place, the place where the love you believed in and the delay you cannot explain are sitting in the same room, is the exact place this chapter was written for. The OUN in John 11:6 was placed there for the people standing exactly where you are standing. And what John does next, in the verses we are about to walk into, will not flatten the weight you came in with. It will name it. 4 days, not 3. That mattered to every person in that crowd. And by the next chapter, you will know why. Here is what every person standing in that crowd outside Bethany already knew before Jesus opened his mouth. In first-century Judea, the moment a person stopped breathing, a count began. Not a metaphor. A count. The rabbinic tradition that shaped every funeral practice in that village, later preserved in writing in the Midrash Rabbah on Genesis and Leviticus, taught that the soul of the dead did not depart the body immediately. It hovered. It lingered near the corpse for 3 days, recognizing the face, hoping, this is the exact language the rabbis used, hoping to return. On the 3rd day, the face began to change. The features they had loved began to be unrecognizable. And on the 4th day, when the visible signs of decomposition could no longer be denied, the soul finally let go and departed. That was the threshold. 3 days, there was still a story you could tell yourself. A coma, a misdiagnosis, a breath the family had missed. 3 days, the rabbis taught, the soul was still close enough that something could happen. 4 days, the door closed. 4 days was the number after which no rabbi, no prophet, no recorded figure in the entire Jewish tradition had ever brought anyone back. Elijah raised the widow's son in 1 Kings 17, the same hour. Elisha raised the Shunammite's son in 2 Kings 4, within hours of the death. Even the man whose body touched Elisha's bones in 2 Kings 13 came back the moment of contact. The pattern was absolute. Resurrection happened before the fourth day, or it did not happen at all. This is the world Mary and Martha were standing in. This is the world the people who walked beside them in the procession from the house to the tomb were standing in. So when John writes, twice, deliberately, in verse 17 and again in verse 39, that Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days, he is not giving you a date stamp. He is telling you, in the only language his readers needed, that what was about to happen had already passed the line. There was no rabbinic precedent for what was coming. There was no prophetic category for it. There was no story anyone in that crowd could tell themselves to make it ordinary. And then there is what Martha says when Jesus tells them to roll the stone away. John 11:39. Lord, by this time he stinketh. The Greek is Ada Ose. Already he reeks. Already. That word is doing more work than almost any English translation lets it. Martha is not protesting on hygienic grounds. She is not embarrassed about smell in front of a guest. She is making a theological surrender. She is saying, in the most Jewish way she knows how, Lord, the threshold has been crossed. We are past the place where the soul could have returned. We are past the day the rabbis taught was the last day. We are at the point where the body itself is announcing what every authority in our tradition told us we had to accept. The smell, that specific, unmistakable, sweet and rotten smell of a body 4 days into the heat of a Judean spring, sealed in a limestone tomb with linen wrappings and 60 pounds of myrrh and aloes the family would have used. That smell was the proof. It was the seal on the verdict. It was the final word her tradition had taught her was final, and Jesus had waited for it. Read that sentence again. He had waited for it. He could have arrived on day 1. He could have arrived on day 2. He could have arrived on day 3, and even then, there was a category for what he might do. By day 4, he had walked the entire crowd past every theological exit, past medical hope, past prophetic precedent, past the hovering soul, past the unrecognizable face, past the threshold the rabbis themselves had drawn. He waited not until it was difficult, not until it was late, until it was impossible. Augustine, writing in Hippo around the year 416 in his tractates on the Gospel of John, saw something else in those 4 days, something the Western reading of this passage carried for the next 1,000 years. He read the 4 days as a figure of the 4 stages of sin. The first day, the thought that arrives. The second, the consent given to it in the heart. The third, the act committed. The fourth, the habit hardened, the sin that is no longer something you do, but something you have become. By the 4th day, Augustine wrote, the man is buried under the weight of what he has chosen, and the smell that rises from his life is the smell Martha named at the tomb. That is the soul Christ comes for, not the one still trembling on day 1, the one that the man himself has stopped expecting to be reached. And maybe that is the place this chapter has been waiting to find you. Maybe there is something in your life that is not 3 days gone. It is 4, the marriage you have stopped trying to repair because every conversation now ends in the same room with the same wall between you. The addiction you confessed 11 years ago and have been managing ever since. But the part of you that was supposed to be free is still wrapped in the cloth. The estrangement from a parent or a child where the silence has gone on so long that even reaching out feels like opening a tomb you sealed for a reason. Whatever it is not new. You have already named it dead. You have already done the math. You have already walked past it the way you walk past a grave. You have stopped visiting. Stay in that for one more sentence. Because the precise weight of 4 days, the weight Martha was carrying when she told him already he reeks, is the exact weight Jesus deliberately let accumulate before he came. Not 3, 4. The day after your tradition, your therapist, your honest assessment of yourself told you to let it go. He did not arrive on day 3 because day 3 still had a story. Day 4 had only him. And when he finally came up the road from the Jordan, when he finally stood at the edge of that village with the dust of 17 miles on his feet and the smell of the tomb already drifting on the wind, he said something to the man standing nearest him that no one in that crowd was prepared to hear. The disciple standing nearest him was Thomas. And what Jesus said, before the road to Bethany was even fully decided, was a sentence that has been sitting in John 11:14 and 11:15 for 2,000 years. Like a small stone everyone has stepped over. He told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. No softening, no he sleeps any longer. That metaphor was already stripped away 2 verses earlier when the disciples misunderstood it. Just the fact, named flat. And then the sentence that should stop every honest reader cold. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. The Greek is cheirodehimas. I rejoice on account of you. Rejoice. Not I accept it. Not in hindsight. It was for the best. The verb is in the present tense, active, deliberate. He is, in that moment, glad. The man he loved is dead in a tomb 17 miles away. The sisters he loved are sitting in a house full of professional mourners, and the smell of burning lamp oil and the low hum of women keening in the courtyard. And Jesus tells the men around him that he is glad he was not there to prevent it. Read that and do not flinch, because if you flinch, if you reach for the soft commentary that says he was only glad about the eventual outcome, you miss what John is doing. John is showing you a Christ whose plan was the delay, not whose plan survived the delay, whose plan was the delay. The 2 days he stayed where he was, the 2 days the runner had wanted him to cancel, the 2 days the disciples had watched him refuse to move, those were not a problem his providence overcame. Those were the providence. The withheld arrival was the gift. And the reason he gives is the part almost no one notices. He does not say, I am glad for Lazarus' sake. He does not even say, I am glad for Mary and Martha's sake. He says, I am glad for your sake, speaking to the 11 men standing around him, hina pisteo sate, that you may believe. The whole delay was structured around what they were going to see. The healing of a sick man would have produced one kind of conviction. They had seen that conviction before, in Capernaum, in Cana, in the synagogue. It was real, but it was the conviction of men who had watched something difficult become possible. What he was about to walk them into was a conviction of a different order entirely. The conviction of men who had watched something impossible become done. He waited for them, not because they were more important than the man dying in Bethany, but because what they were going to carry out of that village would, in less than 3 years, be the thing that walked into Jerusalem and Antioch and Corinth and Rome and outlasted every emperor who tried to bury it. John Chrysostom, preaching in Antioch in 391 in his 8th homily on the Gospel of John, drew a line under this exact moment that the Western reading has often softened. He told his congregation, speaking to working-class believers in a city that had just watched its own bishop go into exile, that there is a difference between what God gives us when we ask and what God gives us when we wait. What we ask for, Chrysostom told them, is shaped by what we already know is possible. We ask for the fever to break. We ask for the marriage to hold. We ask for the test results to come back clean. These are the prayers of people standing on day 1 or day 2, when the soul is still hovering and the categories of our tradition still have a shelf for what we want. But what God gives us when we wait, when the silence stretches past day 3 and into day 4, when the smell has already begun and the verdict has already been signed, what He gives in that place is not the answer to the prayer we sent. It is the answer to the prayer we did not know we could ask. That is exactly the place this chapter is naming. Maybe the thing you have been carrying is a prayer that was answered in a way you did not recognize as an answer, because you had not yet imagined that the thing you actually needed was not the thing you had been asking for. Maybe you asked for the relationship to be repaired, and what you received instead was a clarity about who you were inside it that you would not have asked for in 1,000 years and could not have received any other way. Maybe you asked for the diagnosis to be reversed, and what came was a kind of presence in the room with the person you love that you had been too busy and too unafraid to know was possible. That gift cost the delay. It could not have been delivered on day 1. It required day 4. It required you standing at a tomb you had already named, and a stone you had already accepted would not move. Stay there for one more breath. Because what Jesus told Thomas and the others on that road was not that the delay was acceptable. He told them it was the point. The thing they would see at the tomb, the thing you have been brought to the edge of in your own life, is not the prize on the other side of the silence. It is what the silence was making room for. There was no shorter route to that conviction. There was no version of his arriving on day 1 in which they would have walked out of Bethany different in the way he intended them to be different. He had to wait. And he was glad. That is the sentence the disciples carried with them up the 17-mile road to the village. They walked past Thomas's grim line in John 11:16, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." And they walked into a Bethany already filled with the noise of professional mourners hired by the family, the shrill ululation of women paid to keen, the soft chanting of psalms, the smell of olive lamps, and unwashed grief sitting in every doorway. And then Martha came out alone to meet him on the road before he reached the village, and the conversation that followed in verses 21 through 27 gave the gospel one of its sharpest confessions. I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. She had the doctrine right. She had every category in place, and he told her, quietly, on a dust road outside her own village, that the resurrection was not a date on a calendar. It was a person standing in front of her. She believed him. She walked back to the house. She called for Mary. But when Mary came out of that house and reached the place where Jesus was waiting, something happened that no one, not Martha, not the disciples, not the crowd that had followed her out of the courtyard, was prepared for, something no one expected from a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. Mary did not speak first. She fell. John 11:32 records it in a single phrase. She fell at his feet. And then she said the same sentence Martha had said only minutes earlier, the same sentence the two sisters had clearly spoken to each other in that house through 4 days of waiting. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. The same words, the same accusation wrapped in faith. But what happened next is not what happened with Martha. With Martha, Jesus had answered with a sentence, I am the resurrection and the life, that pulled her up into the highest air of the gospel. With Mary, he did not answer with a sentence at all. He did something John records with 2 Greek verbs that translators have been quietly rounding off for 2,000 years. The first is in verse 33, embrymaomai. The English usually softens it to groaned in the spirit or was deeply moved. Neither is what the word means. Embrymaomai is the verb used in classical Greek for the snorting of a war horse. It is the verb used in the Septuagint for the indignation of a man whose insides are heaving with something he cannot suppress. It is the violent verb. John uses it twice in this passage, verse 33, and again at verse 38 as he approaches the tomb. And in both places he pairs it with etaraxin hoten, a phrase that means literally he troubled himself. He stirred himself up. He did not arrive at composure. He arrived at the kind of internal storm a man enters when he sees someone he loves on the ground at his feet, breaking. And then, verse 35. 2 words in the Greek, edakrisen ho Iesus. Jesus wept. The verb is dakrio, the quiet kind of weeping, tears running down the face, not the loud public wailing the professional mourners around him were performing. A different word entirely. Kleo is what Mary was doing, the loud ritual lament of a Jewish funeral house. Dakrio is what Jesus did. Tears, silently, in front of the crowd. And here is the thing that has unsettled honest readers for 20 centuries, and that the surface of the text does not let you escape from. He knew. He knew at that exact moment that within a few minutes, Lazarus was going to walk out of that tomb. He had told the disciples the day before. He had told Martha on the road. He had structured the entire delay around the certainty of what was about to happen. The tomb was 100 yards away. The stone had not yet been rolled, but the outcome was already settled in his mind. And he wept. Read that and stay in it. Because the thing that sentence breaks is the assumption almost every well-meaning believer has been carrying for most of their lives, that knowing the ending makes the middle hurt less. It does not. He proved it does not. The future being secured did not anesthetize him to the present being unbearable. He saw Mary on the ground in front of him. He saw the crowd from the village, the women from Jerusalem who had walked the 2 miles out to sit with the sisters, weeping with her. And the Greek says, verse 33, that when he saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping with her, he was shaken, not by uncertainty, by love that refused to skip the step. He could have stood there with the gentle confidence of a man who knew the trick ending. He chose not to. He chose instead to enter the weight that in 5 minutes he was going to lift. He felt it because she felt it. He carried it because she was carrying it. And John, who was standing close enough to see his face, recorded it in the shortest verse in the entire Bible. 2 words in Greek, 3 in English. because no longer sentence was needed. Augustine, in his Tractates on the Gospel of John in the year 416, told his congregation in Hippo something the Western reading has carried ever since. The tears at the tomb of Lazarus, he told them, are the proof that the incarnation was not a costume. Christ did not wear humanity like a robe he could lift away from his skin when grief came near. He was not pretending to be moved so the crowd would feel comforted. The verb embrimaomai, Augustine noted, is too violent for theater. The tears were real because the pain was real, because the body was real, because the man weeping at the entrance to that tomb was, in that exact moment, both the one who was about to call Lazarus out and the one whose insides were trembling at what death had done to a woman he loved. Both, without one canceling the other, without the divinity insulating the humanity, without the knowledge of the outcome reaching back through time and softening the moment. He stood there and let it cost him. And maybe that is the place this passage has been waiting to find you. Maybe you are remembering the worst week of your life, and the thing you remember is not what people said. Most of them meant well, but the way the words landed wrong. Someone you trusted told you it would be all right. Someone with a Bible verse told you everything happens for a reason. Someone with a casserole told you to stay strong. And what you needed in that exact moment was not for someone to flatten the weight. You needed someone to feel it with you. You needed someone to sit on the floor and not say anything and not skip ahead to the part where it works out. You needed presence in the present tense, not a guarantee about the future. Stay there for one more breath. Because the thing John 11:35 puts on the page is the answer to the prayer you did not know how to phrase. The God who walked into Bethany did not arrive with reassurance. He arrived with tears. He did not stand at a polite distance from Mary's grief. He went down into it with her, even knowing, especially knowing, that in less than 10 minutes the stone would be moving and the bound man would be walking out into the afternoon light. The future did not exempt him from the present. It does not exempt him from yours. 3 promises. We close them now. Jesus walked the last 100 yards to the tomb, still wet from his own tears, and he did not perform. He did not raise his hands. He did not call down fire. He told them in 3 short commands across John 11:39, 11:43, and 11:44 what to do and what would happen and what came next. Take ye away the stone. Lazarus, come forth. Loose him and let him go. 3 sentences. The whole architecture of the chapter built and resolved in 3 sentences. And here is the first promise closing. The 4 days. I told you in the opening that a 1-day difference would have collapsed the entire account, and now you know why. He did not arrive on the 4th day because he was late. He arrived on the 4th day because the 4th day was the only day on which what he was about to do had no remaining natural explanation. Day 3 left a category. Day 4 left only him. He waited until every other story had been closed, until every shelf in the rabbinic tradition was empty, until the smell rising from that limestone cave was its own affidavit signed by the body itself. Then he spoke, and the man who came out, and this is the detail almost no homily lingers on, came out, still bound. John 11:44. He that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. He was alive and he was wrapped. The resurrection was complete. The unbinding was not. And Jesus, who could have stripped the linen with a word, did not. He turned to the crowd, to Martha, to Mary, to the women from Jerusalem, to the disciples, to the village men who had come out from the courtyard, and he gave them the only command in the whole scene that was addressed to them. Loose him and let him go. Lisate auton, untie him. The work of resurrection was his. The work of unbinding was theirs. Whatever came next in that man's life, whatever it meant to walk out of a tomb at 30 or 35 and live the rest of his life as the man Jesus had called out of death, required hands that were not the Lord's. That is the second promise closing. The "I am glad I was not there" was never about Lazarus. It was about the 11 men who would carry what they saw into the next decade and into the next century, and into the catacombs of Rome, where the earliest images we possess of this scene, 3rd century frescoes still visible in the catacombs of St. Calixtus and St. Priscilla, painted by Christians who had no liberty to paint anything in daylight, show Lazarus standing at the door of the tomb still wrapped, and a community standing around him with their hands lifted to the cloth. Those frescoes survived because what those men saw at Bethany walked with him. The third promise, the tears, you came in asking why he wept if he knew. You leave knowing the answer is not a riddle. He wept because love does not skip steps. He wept because he is not the kind of God who watches your week from a clean distance. He wept because incarnation means he came down into your hour, not over it. I do not know exactly what you carried into this. Maybe you have a prayer that has been in the queue so long it no longer feels like a prayer, more like a habit you cannot quite stop performing. Maybe there is something in your life that has been 4 days dead for 4 years, and you have arranged your whole interior around the fact that it is finished. Maybe you have decided quietly, without telling anyone, that the silence on God's end means the message did not arrive. Or worse, that it arrived and was set aside. Maybe what looks to you like his absence is actually his deliberate refusal to come on day 3, because day 3 would not have been enough. Maybe you are watching someone you love suffer, and you have run out of things to ask, and the worst part is the suspicion that he has run out of answers. Stay in those for a moment without resolving them, because the one word that holds every one of those situations is the word the translator softened in John 11:6. Own. Therefore, he loved them. Therefore, he stayed 2 more days. He loved you. Therefore, the silence has lasted as long as it has. The delay is not the absence of his love. It is the shape his love is taking right now. The thing that day 4 was making room for is not smaller than what you asked for. It is larger than what you knew was possible to ask. And here is what you carry out of this into tomorrow. The next time you stand at something you have already named dead, the relationship, the prayer, the part of you that you stopped expecting to feel anything about, you will remember that he waited not until it was difficult, but until it was impossible. You will know that the smell at the entrance of the tomb was not a problem for him. It was the proof he wanted standing there before he spoke. And you will know that whatever comes out is going to come out still bound, and that the unbinding is not a failure of the resurrection. It is your work, and the work of the people standing closest to you, and the work of a community that knows what hands are for. Lord, thank you for the awen in John 11:6. Thank you for the conjunction every English Bible has tried to soften and could not. Thank you for not arriving on day 3 when we still had a story we could tell ourselves. Thank you for the tears at the tomb, for the verb that means snorting like a war horse, for not standing at a polite distance from grief that you were about to lift. Teach us to wait without despair. Teach us to read the silence as the shape of your love and not the absence of it. And when you call our name, give us hands willing to do the unbinding for the people standing next to us. Amen. Drop a comment right now and tell me, which moment stopped you? Was it the 4 days, the threshold the rabbis themselves had drawn? Was it, I am glad I was not there? The present tense verb, chiro, that no soft commentary can flatten? Or was it the tears of a man who already knew the stone was about to move? Tell me which one. I read every single comment. And if you want to know what the Greek words at Gethsemane actually say, what Jesus prayed in the garden 3 nights before he died, why Luke the physician used a clinical term no other gospel writer used, and what the cup he asked to pass actually contained, that piece is waiting for you right here.